Hi, my name is Sarah Vay Kerns. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm here with Yoshi Weinberg, and their pronouns are they, them. And we are talking about their composition for the Flute New Music Consortium. And welcome, Yoshi. I'm so excited to be here with you.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm excited to be here as well.
So tell us about yourself and your musical background and your current activities.
Sure. So I'm currently living in New York City. I'm a flutist, harpist, and composer. I've been playing since I was little, and I'm actually originally from Minnesota. So my undergrad degree is from St. Olaf College, where I studied with Catherine Ramirez. And then my master's degree is from Manhattan School of Music, where I studied contemporary flute with Tara Helen O'Connor. And currently, I'm co artistic director of Infrasound, which is a new music ensemble based in New York, and also flutist of an electroacoustic trio called Applied Triangle, which is also based in New York City.
Fantastic. And what's it like to play flute and harp?
It's a bit I mean, they're very disparate instruments, so they're very unique to themselves, and there's basically zero crossover between the techniques. I find that that's kind of what intrigued me to the harp in the first place. I'm originally a flutist primarily, and when I was in undergrad, I found a room that had a bunch of harps in it, and I was like, I want to learn that instrument, and there's just harps there. So I contacted the harp professor and was like, can I take private lessons? And she was like, sure. And so I started studying, and I've been playing harp now for about 8 years, and I definitely go through cycles of playing harp and then not playing so much flute, and then playing a lot of flute and not so much harp. But I can't see myself not playing either of them now.
That's amazing. I love your self-starter method for getting into flute and harp. I mean, that's fantastic.
Yeah, I've always kind of been a self motivated. I grew up in a small Minnesotan town, which had very little like performance opportunities and very little music education besides like middle school band. So all of my desire to be a professional was kind of motivated internally. There was something about flute and about composition and performing that was just like innate to me, that it kind of allowed me to channel all my creative energies into music when I didn't have many other opportunities when I was a young kid.
I grew up in a small town. I can relate to that. So tell us about the inspiration behind the piece you're writing for the Flute New Music Consortium.
So the piece is entitled Panic Etudes, and it was inspired actually by a moment when I was recording for a DMA pre screening audition. I had a piece that I was trying to prepare and perform, and I was recording it, and it just was not coming along. And I felt like a episode of panic, like a panic attack coming on. And what I ended up doing was, instead of playing the piece for the audition, I recorded an improvisation while I was having a panic attack, and that kind of inspired me to think about how I can use these panic episodes as inspiration for a piece. So each of the small short movements of these etudes is going to be a description of a symptom of a panic attack, and hopefully they each also kind of use different mechanics of the flute, like different techniques that you can like develop through an etude style, but also representing sonically like a symptom of a panic attack.
Does that inform your work in general? It seems like you have a deep emotional connection to the music, and um, does that inform more of your work?
I'm generally a storyteller or a connect like I'm a very emotional person. A lot of some contemporary music is very, I don't know, I wouldn't say anti-emotional, but very much wrapped up in the technical aspects of it. And I'm drawn to that as a performer, but as a composer, I've always found that relating emotions, specifically like through storytelling, um, is really important to me. So a lot of my music comes from an emotional place at the start. And they also always stem from improvisation as well. So there's always this kind of performance aspect that I imbue into my compositions. I'm rarely just sitting at a piano like writing notes down. I'm usually playing an instrument, like the flute, for instance, or the harp, to get inspiration for the pieces. So it usually is, and that is always like reflecting like my emotional state too at the time when I'm improvising. If I'm like feeling some sort of anxiousness, that's going to definitely come across in some of the music I write, or if I'm in a state of, euphoria or happiness, that also comes across. So yes, it's very important for me to like allow myself to be emotional while writing and to showcase that in my pieces.
It's really beautiful. So, who has inspired you most as a composer?
That's a tricky question because I've been thinking about this a lot, like who inspires me, and it's rarely like classical composers. I found it's actually, I listen to a lot of indie folk music and kind of like folk slash like experimental electronic music. So some of my inspirations are actually songwriters. One in particular, Joanna Newsom, who's a harpist and a songwriter, and her music had a great influence on me as a young person. And I continue to like listen to her music constantly. She's able to like kind of blend a classical instrument, the harp, with folk songwriting, and I find that very intriguing. And I also listen to someone named Hauschka, who's a pianist who uses prepared piano in all of his works.
Nice.
And there's just something like very quirky, but also like nostalgic and sentimental about his music. And it's not very experimental, but it is because it's like prepared piano, but he uses it in such a like songful way. So I'm also inspired by Jan Tiersen, who wrote the soundtrack for Amelie, and also this Japanese composer slash musician Motohiro Nakashima, who uses electronic music and acoustic instruments like kind of together to create a very like interesting and quirky sound world that is also very like tuneful and like tonal. So those are kind of my inspirations.
Oh, that's fantastic. So, do you find those influences in your work then, the electronic mixed with the acoustic and sound manipulation?
Yeah, I definitely like try to imbue that aspect. Like a lot of my music is tonal, and a lot of it relies heavily on like ostinati or like repeated figures, and incorporating both like the tonal aspects and like experimental aspects of electronics, and also like manipulation of the instrument through extended techniques. I find like complementing those two, something that I continue to do in my music a lot. So I really enjoy that aspect. It's going to be a challenge for solo flute because I actually haven't written like a just unaccompanied solo flute work before. There's always been
Oh, really?
there's always been electronics or another instrument to kind of create like harmonic background, and harmony is really important to me. So I'm thinking of like the struggles and challenges of trying to make a single instrument, a monophonic instrument, like have this element of harmony that is important to me. So that's something I'm going to be trying to look at, maybe
Your
through
challenge?
multiphonics. Yeah, challenge like through multiphonics and voice leading, um, in repetition. It's going to be something I'm challenged by for sure.
That makes sense. How did you begin composing?
That's a good question. So I wouldn't say I just like started composing. When I was little, I would find myself at a piano and just be like pressing keys until like the sounds made me happy. In an early start of improvisation. And I was also starting to work on, my dad actually had a computer that had a digital audio workstation, a DAW, where you can like multi-track like MIDI instruments. So I'd like play a flute line and improvise it at the keyboard, and then like add strings and like kind of like just improvise these compositions, but they weren't written down. They were always just like recorded. And eventually, when I was going into college, I started like playing around with Finale, like a notation software, and like writing down my improvisations. Even though I was usually doing it, I didn't think of it as composition. And then started actual taking composition lessons like my sophomore year of undergrad and developing like kind of a more, I guess, thoughtful way of approaching composition, or like getting more ideas of how to structure and like how to um, like create and develop ideas more instead of just like writing down my improvisations. And that, you know, bloomed into me really like identifying as a composer, and then getting a few commissions here and there until I was like actually getting paid to write music, which was, you know, something I never thought was going to happen. I always like viewed myself kind of as a performer, and now I'm more of a performer composer. They're kind of interchangeable.
Fantastic. I think you mentioned the challenge of a solo instrument to incorporate the harmonic aspects. So what would you say you like about composing for flute, and what's challenging about composing specifically for flute?
So one of my favorite things about the flute is its connection to the breath and like how personal it is. Like every flutist has like a unique voice, and it's always like kind of, it changes depending on your anatomy and also the way that you breathe and how you can actually manipulate the instrument, because everyone has different sized lungs, so that changes like how much you can put into the flute, and that changes your tone. So that's always really intriguing to me, how like much connected it is to your like physicality, and like how breath really shapes the tone, and like how you always kind of hear the breath in the flute. So that's something I like the most about the instrument. A challenging thing for me is really finding something new to do with the instrument, because there's so much repertoire for it, especially contemporary music. There's a lot of pieces written for solo flute, and how I can like break the mold or like how I can do something unique is really challenging, because there has been a lot done for the instrument, which is great. And it's like, do I want to, you know, continue some tradition, or do I want to like try to actually discover a new sound, like, which it seems impossible now to discover a new sound on the flute, because everyone's, you know, you've done everything with it.
That is a challenge.
Yeah, I'm starting to see people do like prepared flute, which I'm like, that doesn't seem right to me. But it's, you know, attaching balloons to the instruments. Like, do I want to go that far? Probably not. But there's a lot. And also as a performer, it's like, I've played so much repertoire too that like, I don't want to accidentally like copy something that I just like subconsciously know or like have played before.
Yeah, that's a challenge.
There's a challenge of like being an instrumentalist and not actually, I kind of have a bias with the instrument because I know what works and what doesn't, but like don't want to be caught in a cliche either. So I like can't come, like I can't detach myself from being a flutist while I'm writing for it.
Yeah, that's an interesting challenge. I'm really looking forward to hearing your voice.
Thank you.
Tell us about the other pieces you wrote for flute.
So most recently I have a piece for flute and harp that was commissioned by the Element Duo, which the flutist is from Minnesota and the harpist lives in Texas. And they commissioned me to write a piece for them for a concert, and it's called To Be a Body Which Is But a Shadow, which is a reference to Ovid's Metamorphosis. He talks about Narcissus and Echo, like the fable of those two mythical creatures. And so I used that as inspiration, and also kind of was tangentially related to myself coming out as a non-binary person and experiencing gender kind of disparately, or like feeling like sometimes my body does feel like a shadow, or like I don't feel connected with it as much as a binary person might. So that was in like how the fluidness of gender is for my experience as a person. And so I kind of use those two instruments as shadows of each other, and they play off each other, sometimes play in unison, sometimes echoing each other. And another piece I'm actually currently writing is for a friend of mine, for bass flute and electronics, which is kind of just like a fun piece for me. It's almost like a meme, because it's inspired by like, so we have this like joke where my autocorrect always goes crazy for some reason, so I'll text her the most absurd things.
You're not the only one.
Just autocorrected completely wrong. And
Yeah.
so I use some of those like mistext messages to like inspire each movement of this bass piece.
That's great.
And using like voice to speech a lot in the electronics, so you hear a lot of like computerized voices saying these absurd things. And so that's just kind of like a fun project I'm doing.
Yeah, that sounds really fun.
Kind of just to get me back. It's been hard to compose during quarantine, as you can imagine. Just like the creativity has been a little bit squashed, and it's hard to find inspiration while we're all, very, very much isolated and not really experiencing much art or going out anymore. So that's been a challenge. But I'm looking forward for this piece has really been, for the FNMC, it's really been an inspiration for me, and will help me kind of get over that hump as well.
I think speaking for myself, I'm very excited about it, and it's nice to have that connection. So thank you so much for sharing of yourself and your music. I'm so looking forward to it.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you FNMC for commissioning me. I'm really looking forward to this work as well.